Hello, good evening. Thanks for being here. My name is Mark Ramsey. I'm a longtime activist, former state Republican executive committeeman, and it's a real honor to even be asked to address you tonight. I'm humbled and I'm grateful all at the same time. What I'm here to talk about is how you can make very complicated subjects very simple to an audience who may have never heard the concept before. Think of this, first of all, as you've got this great opportunity to go out and convince somebody of something that's one of the most important things in your life, and they know nothing about it. Well, how are you going to be doing that? Well, it starts way before you get up there to speak. It starts by always being ready to have an answer. And in fact, the Bible in Colossians tells us, and I'm going to quote this, "Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders, making the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." So obviously that takes preparation to begin with. You have to be ready. You have to understand things. You have to be ready to go sometimes on a moment's notice because you might not have preparation time like I have with this video. Another way to think of it is that you have a certain amount of bandwidth. Now, there I go using a complicated word. Some of you may not know what bandwidth means. Bandwidth is simply available time, available life. Think of it as the opportunity. So what you want to do is use that bandwidth effectively. You don't want to waste it in any particular way. One of the biggest things in doing this effectively is you personally have to understand your subject. There's almost nothing worse than someone who barely understands a complicated subject trying to make that subject simple. So when you're going through this, when you're thinking about what you might say, if you have preparation time, jot down your ideas, at least in bullet points. And then after you've done that, go back through that list with a very good sharp pencil and cross off the things that the person doesn't really necessarily have to understand when they walk out of the room. Bullet point those important ideas, scratch out the ones that are not so important. You got to decide what really matters. And I can tell you from example, most things really don't matter. So really focus it down to the big items. You should always strive to be precise. Being simple does not mean you lose precision. Just don't deviate from something being accurate in order to make it maybe a little bit more simple. Related to that is don't exaggerate or deviate from the truth. Sometimes it's real easy to just throw something out there, but you're not quite being truthful. That's a wrong way to convince somebody of a good idea, and people they'll just have a red flag that goes up in the back of their mind that something just didn't quite make sense there. So don't do that. Now, here's one of the most important things. Do not use jargon. If you may understand the subject and the jargon associated with that subject better than anybody else on the planet, but force yourself not to use that jargon. Why? It's because the jargon represents another language, even if it's in English. And so medical doctors use their own terminology. Physicists use their own terminology. But when they're trying to explain what's wrong with you as a patient or explain a physics concept to maybe a skeptical political audience, they're going to put that in terms that the audience can understand. So speak the language of the audience. Don't use jargon. Most of your neighbors don't know what a primary is. Most of your neighbors don't know what an open or a closed primary is. So when we talk as a Republican Party about having a long-time goal of the grassroots of closing our primaries, your average neighbor is not going to understand that. They're going to start wondering, are we going to have to register again? Are we going to be kicked out of the primary? Are we going to have to pay something for this? None of that matters. You have to put it in simple terms And the simplest way I can think of to describe it, and we will be bringing this up at the state convention right around the corner, is we are going to be trying to let Republicans select Republican candidates without any interference from Democrats whatsoever. It's really that simple. None of those earlier questions were wrong, but none of those earlier questions really mattered either. What matters is we're trying to pick Republican candidates without interference from Democrats. The other thing is use easy to understand analogies if you have to. So you might not be talking about the exact subject, but use analogies or metaphors, or Jesus used parables. Well, why is that an effective way to communicate? It's real simple, because you are tying your new concept, you're tying that new concept into a concept that your audience already understands. The caution is don't make things too simple. You don't want to oversimplify so that you lose some of the important details. Like Einstein is famously quoted as saying, everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. And that's because there's some things that just require a little bit of explanation. And so once you've kind of softened the beach up and your audience already understands a bit about what you're trying to accomplish and what you're teaching them, think of it as being a teacher. At that point, you can go into a few details if you have to. One couple other quick things before I close. If you're trying to get a concept across at, say, a legislative or a state platform committee hearing, something along those lines, just kind of toward the end, I really encourage you to not take what I've just shared with you as rules or something you have to abide by. I've learned these work for me over many decades of activism, but I've also learned that freedom works. And so if something works a little bit better for you, feel free to go where that freedom leads you. Don't be afraid to take risks. Risks are good. It's been said that you never win a battle without taking some risk. So don't be afraid to take some risk with what you're talking about. Always keep your audience in mind. Know your audience. I should have put that way up at the top of one of my initial bullet points. And it's not about you. It doesn't really matter if they remember your name when they walk out of the room. What's important is they remember the concept that you're trying to get across to them. In closing, what am I saying? I'm saying don't go outside your knowledge base. Don't go outside your subject. Be the expert on your particular subject. It's what a guy named Stephen Covey years ago wrote a book about, and he said, stick to your circle of influence. What did he mean by that? He said that there's all kinds of things, especially in our world today with the internet, that are grabbing for our attention. We are concerned about poverty in Africa. We are concerned about wars that break out all over the world. But the reality is we can't personally do much about most of those things. And his admonition was to stick to things in your circle of influence, not merely your circle of concern, and try to make sure that you are influencing people around you that you actually have influence with. Some of you, that may be friends and close family only. Others, it may be a much wider audience than that. But his real convincing point, and I've seen this personally over my life, I've seen this personally over the lives of my friends, is that if you stick to that circle of influence and push those things that you are truly experts on, what happens is that circle of influence grows and grows and grows until it might even almost overlap with your circle of concern. A really, really powerful concept. So again, I'm honored. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I hope I didn't take too terribly long in addressing you, and I thank you so much for your time, your life, and the opportunity. Thank you.